Danny Razor Morrison had never intended to end up at the Royal Marines Tattoo that evening in Edinburgh. The 20-year-old biker had been riding north from London on his Harley-Davidson, trying to outrun memories that seemed to follow him wherever he went. The massive motorcycle rally he had planned to attend in Scotland had been cancelled due to weather, leaving him with nowhere particular to go and too much time to think. He had pulled into Edinburgh just as the sun was setting. His black leather jacket worn from years of road trips, his boots scuffed from countless miles of riding. Danny looked every inch the stereotypical biker, long hair tied back, beard stubble, arms covered in tattoos that told stories he rarely shared with anyone. Most people crossed the street when they saw him coming, and he had learned to prefer it that way. The sound of military drums and bagpipes echoing through the city streets caught his attention. As he searched for a place to grab dinner, the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo was in full swing at the castle. Thousands of tourists and locals gathering to watch the spectacular display of military precision and Scottish tradition Danny had never been particularly interested in. Military ceremonies or royal pageantry. His relationship with authority figures had been complicated since his teenage years, and anything connected to the establishment usually left him feeling uncomfortable and out of place. But something about the music drew him closer to the castle esplanade, where crowds of well-dressed families and excited tourists were streaming toward the entrance. He parked his Harley in a side street and walked toward the commotion, intending to attend the event, but curious about what was causing such excitement. The contrast between his rough appearance and the formally dressed crowd was stark. Parents in smart casual clothes, children in their best outfits, elderly couples wearing tartan scarves and carrying small Union
flags.
Danny felt increasingly out of place as he approached the castle grounds. Security personnel in high-visibility vests were directing traffic and checking tickets, while vendors sold programs and souvenirs to eager visitors. He was about to turn around and find a quiet pub somewhere when he heard a commotion near one of the entrance gates. A young mother was struggling with a push-hare while trying to corral two small children who were excited about the drums and music. Her husband was fumbling with their tickets and a camera, clearly overwhelmed by the chaos of managing the family while trying not to miss the beginning of the show. One of the children, a little girl about 5 years old, had broken free from her parents and was running toward the road where cars were still dropping off late arrivals. She was chasing a balloon that had slipped from her grasp, completely oblivious to the danger she was heading toward. Without thinking, Danny sprinted after the child, his long legs and athletic build honed by years of manual labor and motorcycle maintenance allowed him to quickly close the distance. He scooped up the little girl just as a taxi was turning the corner, the driver honking his horn in warning. "Whoa there, little one," Danny said gently, settling the child safely on the pavement and retrieving her balloon. "That's a busy road for such a small explorer." The child looked up at him with wide eyes, taking in his intimidating appearance but sensing the kindness in his voice. "Thank you, mister," she said politely. "I almost lost my balloon." Her parents rushed over, the mother pale with fear and relief. "Oh my goodness, thank you so much," she said breathlessly. "Emma, you know you're not supposed to run away like that." The father extended his hand to Danny with genuine gratitude. "I can't thank you enough. We were so distracted trying to get organized. If you hadn't been there," Danny waved off there. "Thanks. Uncomfortable with the attention." "No worries. Just glad she's safe." As the family reunited and continued toward the entrance, Danny noticed that his quick sprint and dive to catch the child had caused a small tear in his leather jacket and scuffed his jeans on the cobblestones. More importantly, he had caught the attention of several people in the crowd, including some security personnel who were now observing him with professional interest. He was brushing dust off his clothes when he became aware of someone standing very close behind him. Danny turned around and found himself face to face with one of the royal guards who had been stationed near the entrance as part of the security detail for the event. The guard was impressive. In his full ceremonial uniform, red tunic, black trousers with red stripes, and the iconic bearskin hat that made him appear even taller than his already considerable height, his bearing was perfect, his expression professionally neutral. and his presence commanded immediate respect from everyone around him. What Danny didn't expect was for their eyes to meet and hold for a moment longer than seemed normal. Something in the guard's gaze, a flicker of recognition, curiosity, or perhaps assessment that made Danny feel suddenly self-conscious about his disheveled appearance and rough demeanor. The crowd continued to flow around them. But for a moment, it felt as if time had slowed down. Danny found himself studying the guard's face, noting the discipline and control evident in every line of his posture, wondering what it would be like to live with such rigid structure and formal responsibility. He was so absorbed in this unexpected moment of connection that he didn't notice the group of rowdy teenagers pushing through the crowd behind him until it was too late. The group of teenagers, clearly having had too much to drink before the event, was pushing and shoving each other in a display of bravado that was making other visitors uncomfortable. They were laughing loudly, taking selfies, and generally treating the formal military ceremony like a casual party. "Watch it, mate," one of them shouted as he stumbled into an elderly couple trying to navigate through the crowd with their walking sticks. Danny instinctively moved to help steady the older gentleman, who had been knocked off balance, but as he stepped forward, one of the teenagers barreled directly into him from behind. The impact sent Danny stumbling forward, and he found himself colliding directly with the royal guard, who had been observing the crowd. The collision was jarring for both men. Danny's momentum carried him into the guard's perfectly pressed uniform, and in the tangle of arms and bodies trying to regain balance, Danny's leather jacket caught on one of the ornate buttons of the guard's red tunic. There was a distinct tearing sound as the fabric of the ceremonial uniform ripped along a seam near the shoulder. For a moment, both men stood frozen, assessing what had just happened. Danny looked down in horror at the damage to the pristine military uniform, a jagged tear in the red wool that was clearly visible and completely inappropriate for someone representing the crown at such a formal event. The Royal Guard, whose name tag read CPL, James Mitchell, looked down at his torn uniform with an expression that was impossible to read behind his professional mask. Around them, the crowd had begun to notice the commotion, with people stopping to stare at the unusual sight of a rough-looking biker apparently having caused damage to a guard's ceremonial dress. "Oh, bloody hell," Danny muttered under his breath, immediately realizing the significance of what had happened. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. Some idiot teenagers pushed me and—" Corporal Mitchell raised his hand slightly, a gesture that immediately silenced Danny's panicked explanation. When the guard spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, and carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. "Are you injured, sir?" Mitchell asked, his concern apparently more focused on Danny's welfare than on the damage to his own uniform. Danny was taken aback by the question. He had expected anger, formal procedures, possibly even arrest for damaging military property. Instead, the guard was asking about his well-being. "I'm fine," Danny replied, still trying to process the situation. "But your uniform, I've torn. This is terrible. I know how important these ceremonies are, and now you can't." "The uniform can be repaired," Mitchell said simply. "What matters is that no one was hurt." Behind them, the group of teenagers who had caused the initial collision were now taking photos of the scene with their phones, laughing and making jokes about the biker versus the Queen's Guard. Their behavior was drawing disapproving looks from other visitors and the attention of security personnel. Danny felt his temper rising as he heard their mocking comments. These kids had caused the accident through their careless behavior, and now they were treating it like entertainment for their social media accounts. "Hey," Danny called out, turning toward the teenagers. "This happened because you lot were pushing through the crowd like idiots. The least you could do is apologize instead of taking pictures."
No.
The teenagers' laughter died down as they realized Danny was confronting them directly. The largest of the group, a young man with an expensive haircut and designer clothes, stepped forward with the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences. "What's it to you, Grandpa?" the teenager sneered. "Maybe if you dressed like a normal person instead of some kind of reject from a motorcycle gang, people wouldn't run into you." Danny felt his hands clench into fists. Years of dealing with prejudice and assumptions based on his appearance had taught him to expect this kind of reaction, but it still stung every time. More than that, he was angry that these privileged kids were treating the whole situation as a joke, when Corporal Mitchell was clearly trying to handle everything with dignity and professionalism. "That's enough," came Mitchell's voice. And there was something in his tone that immediately commanded attention from everyone within earshot. "All of you need to move along and allow other visitors to enjoy the event." The teenagers looked at the guard with a mixture of nervousness and continued defiance. They weren't sure how far they could push someone in an official uniform, but their egos wouldn't let them back down completely. "It's not our fault some biker can't watch where he's going," the leader of the group muttered, though less aggressively than before. Mitchell took a step forward, his impressive height and bearing making the teenagers look suddenly very young and very foolish. "I said that's enough. You'll move along now, or I will have security escort you from the premises." The authority in his voice was unmistakable. The teenagers finally seemed to realize they were dealing with someone who had real power and wasn't impressed by their attitude. They muttered among themselves and began to shuffle away, though not without some final mocking comments directed at both Danny and the guard. As the crowd began to disperse and the immediate drama settled down, Danny found himself alone with Corporal Mitchell again. The torn uniform was still clearly visible, and Danny felt the weight of responsibility for having disrupted what should have been a perfect evening of military ceremony. "Look," Danny said, running his hand through his hair nervously, "I need to make this right somehow. Can I pay for repairs? Buy you a new uniform? I know this is probably expensive and important, and I've completely messed up your evening." Mitchell studied Danny for a moment with those same unreadable eyes. When he spoke again, there was something different in his tone. Less formal, more personal. "What's your name?" Mitchell asked quietly. "Danny. Danny Morrison," he replied, surprised. By the question, Mitchell nodded slowly. "Oh, Danny Morrison, it seems we have a situation that requires some creative problem-solving." Danny waited nervously for Mitchell to explain what he meant by creative problem-solving. The torn uniform was becoming more noticeable as other guards and military personnel moved through the area, and Danny could see some of them glancing at Mitchell's damaged tunic with concern. "Corporal Mitchell," Danny said, "I understand if you need to report this incident, or if there are procedures you have to follow. I just want you to know that I take full responsibility for what happened, and I'll do whatever I can to make it right." Mitchell looked at Danny thoughtfully, then glanced around at the crowd of tourists and families still making their way into the castle for the evening's performance. The sound of drums and bagpipes was growing louder as the ceremony prepared to begin. "The thing is, Danny," Mitchell said, dropping some of the formal military tone from his voice, "I'm supposed to be on ceremonial duty for the next 3 hours. This uniform needs to look perfect, and there's no time to get it repaired before my shift ends." Danny's heart sank. "So what happens now? Do you have to miss the ceremony? Will you get in trouble because of what I did?" "That depends," Mitchell replied, and there was something almost like amusement in his eyes. "How do you feel about attending a military tattoo?" Danny was confused by the question. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Mitchell gestured toward the entrance to the castle grounds where the ceremony was taking place. "The Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo. 3 hours of military bands, Scottish regiments, international performers, and enough pageantry to make your head spin. Are you interested in experiencing it?" "I don't understand what that has to do with your uniform," Danny said. Though he found himself curious despite his confusion, Mitchell smiled for the first time since their collision, and the expression completely transformed his face. Suddenly, he looked less like an intimidating military figure and more like a regular person with a sense of humor and a problem to solve. "Here's what I'm thinking," Mitchell explained. "I have a spare dress uniform in my kit bag back at the barracks vehicle. It's not the full ceremonial gear I'm wearing now, but it's appropriate for duty. The problem is, I can't leave my post to go get it, and I can't send anyone else because it requires my personal authorization to access military equipment." Danny was beginning to understand. "You need someone to go with you to get the spare uniform?" "More than that," Mitchell said. "I need someone who understands that they've inadvertently become involved in a military situation and is willing to help resolve it in an unconventional way." Danny looked around at the formal crowd, the uniformed personnel, and the grand setting of Edinburgh Castle lit up for the evening ceremony. Everything about this environment was foreign to him, but Mitchell's direct approach and practical problem-solving appealed to him. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Danny asked. "Asking you to be my guest for the evening," Mitchell replied. "There's a protocol for military personnel who need to briefly leave their posts during ceremonial duties. They can be accompanied by a civilian witness who takes responsibility for ensuring proper procedures are followed. It's rarely used, but it exists." Danny stared at him. "You want me to be your official civilian witness?" "I want you to help me solve the problem you accidentally created," Mitchell said with a grin. "Plus, you'll get to see one of the most impressive military displays in the world. I guarantee it's not what you'd expect." Danny looked down at his torn leather jacket, his scuffed jeans, and his motorcycle boots. "Do I look like someone who belongs at a royal military ceremony?" "You look like someone who jumped in front of a car to save a child's life about 20 minutes ago," Mitchell replied. "You look like someone who took responsibility for an accident and wanted to make it right. You look like exactly the kind of person I'd want watching my back." The sincerity in Mitchell's voice caught Danny off guard. He had been prepared for anger, official procedures, or formal consequences. He hadn't expected to be treated as an equal or offered what amounted to a partnership in solving the problem. "Besides," Mitchell added with a slight smile, "I'm curious to see what you think of military tradition when you experience it up close. You might be surprised." Danny found himself considering the offer seriously. He had nowhere else to be, nothing else planned for the evening, and something about Mitchell's straightforward approach was appealing. More than that, he felt genuinely responsible for the situation and wanted to help resolve it. "If I do this," Danny said slowly, "what exactly would be expected of me? I don't know anything about military protocols or ceremonies. You'd need to stay with me while I retrieve the spare uniform, witness that proper procedures were followed, and then—" Mitchell paused, looking slightly uncertain for the first time. "Then you'd need to stay for the entire ceremony as my official guest. The paperwork requires a civilian witness to remain present until the duty period is complete." Danny understood now why Mitchell had called it creative problem-solving. This wasn't just about getting a spare uniform. It was about navigating military bureaucracy in a way that would keep Mitchell out of trouble while ensuring all the proper procedures were followed. 3 hours of military ceremony, Danny mused. Bagpipes, drums, marching bands, and a lot of very formal people in very formal uniforms. 3 hours of some of the most talented musicians and performers in the world, Mitchell corrected. People who have dedicated their lives to excellence, precision, and serving something larger than themselves. It might not be your usual entertainment, but I guarantee it will be memorable. Danny looked at Mitchell's confident expression, then at the magnificent backdrop of Edinburgh Castle, then back at the torn uniform that was his responsibility to help fix. "All right, Corporal Mitchell," Danny said, extending his hand. "You've got yourself a civilian witness. But I should warn you, I'm probably going to ask a lot of questions." Mitchell shook his hand firmly. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't. And Danny, call me James, if we're going to be partners for the evening. We might as well be on a first-name basis." James led Danny through a series of checkpoints and security barriers that Danny never would have known existed. With his official military identification and Danny's newly issued civilian witness pass, they moved through areas of Edinburgh Castle that were completely off-limits to the general public. "This is incredible," Danny said as they walked through ancient stone corridors that had been transformed into bustling preparation areas for the evening's performance. "I had no idea there was so much happening behind the scenes." Everywhere Danny looked, there was organized activity. Musicians were tuning instruments, dancers were stretching and rehearsing routines, and technical crews were managing sound and lighting equipment that seemed impossibly complex for an outdoor venue. "The public sees 90 minutes of performance," James explained as they navigated through the controlled chaos. "But what they don't see are the months of planning, the weeks of rehearsal, the hundreds of people working to make sure every detail is perfect." They passed a group of Scottish Highland dancers adjusting their costumes and practicing their steps on a piece of portable flooring. The precision and athleticism of their movements was mesmerizing, and Danny found himself stopping to watch. Despite their urgent mission, professional dancers? Danny asked. Some are. Others are soldiers who happen to be exceptional dancers, James replied. The military doesn't just train people for combat, we develop excellence in every area that represents the crown and the country. As they continued deeper into the castle grounds, Danny began to understand the massive scale of coordination required for an event like this. There were performers from multiple countries, dozens of different military units, and technical crews, managing everything from pyrotechnics to live television broadcasts. How do you keep track of all this? Danny asked as they passed a room where officers were monitoring multiple computer screens showing different areas of the performance space. Years of training, very detailed planning, and everyone understanding their specific role in the larger mission, James explained. It's not that different from any other military operation, just with more music and fewer weapons. They reached a secured area where military vehicles were parked, including several large transport trucks that served as mobile command centers and equipment storage. James approached one of the vehicles and spoke briefly with a sergeant who was managing access to the military supplies. "This is Danny Morrison, my civilian witness for Uniform Replacement Protocol 7 Alpha," James said formally, presenting both his identification and a form it filled out during their walk. The sergeant looked at Danny with undisguised curiosity, taking in his leather jacket, long hair, and general appearance that was completely unlike any civilian witness he had probably ever seen. "Civilian witness, eh?" the sergeant said with a slight Scottish accent. "That's not something we see very often, Corporal Mitchell. Unusual circumstances, Sergeant McLeod," James replied. "Mr. Morrison was involved in the incident that damaged my ceremonial uniform, and he's volunteered to assist with proper replacement procedures." Sergeant McLeod looked between James and Danny with growing amusement. "Well, that's mighty decent of him. Go ahead and retrieve what you need, Corporal. Mr. Morrison, you'll need to sign the witness log confirming that proper procedures were followed." As James disappeared into the vehicle to change uniforms, Danny found himself in an awkward conversation with Sergeant McLeod, who seemed determined to understand exactly how a biker had ended up as an official military witness. "So, Mr. Morrison," McLeod said conversationally, "what brings you to Edinburgh, besides accidentally tearing holes in our dress uniforms, that is?" Danny couldn't help but smile at the sergeant's direct approach. "Just passing through on my motorcycle, heard the music from the ceremony and got curious about what was happening." "And now you're getting the full behind-the-scenes tour," McLeod observed. "What do you think so far?" Danny looked around at the organized activities surrounding them, soldiers efficiently managing equipment, musicians preparing for their performances, technical crews coordinating complex logistics with military precision. "It's not what I expected," Danny admitted. "I've always thought of military stuff as very rigid and, I don't know, impersonal. But everyone here seems genuinely excited about what they're doing." "That's because most of us are," McLeod replied. "When you're part of something this big, something that represents your country and your service, it stops being just a job. It becomes something you're proud to be part of." James emerged from the vehicle in a fresh uniform that, while not as elaborate as his ceremonial dress, was perfectly pressed and appropriate for duty. The transformation reminded Danny of how impressive military bearing could be when combined with pride in service. "All set," James announced. "Sergeant McLeod, thank you for the assistance." "No problem, Corporal. Mr. Morrison, I hope you enjoy the show. It's quite something when you see it from the inside." As they made their way back toward the performance area, Danny found himself asking questions about everything they passed. James patiently explained the role of different units, history behind various traditions, and the international cooperation that made the tattoo possible. "There are performers here from 12 different countries," James said as they walked past a group of musicians in unfamiliar uniforms speaking what sounded like German. Military bands, cultural groups, traditional performers, all working together to create something that celebrates both military excellence and international friendship. Danny was struck by this perspective. "I never thought about military ceremonies as being about friendship and cooperation." "The best military traditions are," James replied. "They're about service, excellence, and bringing people together around shared values. The pageantry and formality are just the visible expressions of those deeper commitments. They reached a special viewing area that Danny hadn't known existed. A section reserved for military personnel and their guests that offered an exceptional view of the performance space while remaining separate from the main tourist seating. "This is where you'll watch the ceremony," James explained. "I'll be on duty in the ceremonial area, but you'll have a better view from here than most people in the audience." Danny looked out over the spectacular setup, the castle illuminated. Against the night sky, the precisely arranged seating for thousands of spectators. And the performance area where final preparations were being completed. "James," Danny said, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the generosity he was being shown. "I don't know how to thank you for this. You could have just reported the incident and let me deal with the consequences. Instead, you've given me an experience I never could have imagined." James smiled and adjusted his uniform one final time. "You jumped in front of a car to save a child, Danny. You took responsibility for an accident and wanted to make it right. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Besides," he added with a grin, "I'm curious to see what you think of all this pageantry and tradition once you've experienced it properly." As the opening music began to echo across the castle grounds, Danny realized he was about to witness something truly extraordinary. But more than that, he was beginning to understand that his collision with James Mitchell had led to much more than just a torn uniform. It had opened a door to a world he had never expected to enter, much less appreciate. As the first notes of the massed military bands filled the evening air, Danny felt something he had never experienced before. The sound wasn't just music, it was power, precision, and emotion, combined in a way that seemed to vibrate through his entire body. From his privileged vantage point, he could see the incredible coordination required to manage hundreds of performers moving in perfect synchronization. The opening ceremony featured the massed bands of the Scottish regiments, their bagpipes and drums creating a sound that was both hauntingly beautiful and tremendously powerful. Danny had heard bagpipes before at various events, but never like this, never with the full force of multiple pipe bands playing in perfect harmony against the backdrop of Edinburgh Castle. "My God," Danny whispered to himself, completely mesmerized by the spectacle unfolding before him. A military officer sitting nearby, who had noticed Danny's obvious amazement, leaned over with a friendly smile. "First time at the tattoo?" "First time at anything like this," Danny replied honestly. "I had no idea it would be so overwhelming." "That's the point," the officer said with understanding. "Military music is designed to inspire, to move people emotionally, and to demonstrate the power that comes from individuals working together toward a common goal." As the evening progressed, Danny watched performance after performance that challenged everything he thought he knew about military ceremonies. There were Highland dancers whose athletic ability and grace rivaled any professional performers he had ever seen. There were international bands that brought completely different musical traditions, but somehow fitted perfectly into the overall program. During a performance by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, Danny found himself on his feet with everyone else in the viewing area as the horses and riders executed maneuvers that required credible skill and trust between horse and rider. The precision of their movements, combined with the historical significance of their role in royal ceremonies, created something that was both entertainment and living history. "How do they train for something like this?" Danny asked the officer beside him. "Years of practice," came the reply. "But more than that, it's about understanding that you're part of something much larger than yourself. Each person out there knows that hundreds of other people are depending on them to do their part perfectly." Danny found himself thinking about this concept as he watched James moving through his ceremonial duties with other guards in the performance area. Even from a distance, Danny could see the pride and professionalism that James brought to every aspect of his role. This wasn't just a job or even just a duty, it was a calling that James clearly took seriously. The emotional high point of the evening came during a tribute to fallen soldiers. As the lone piper played the last post from the castle ramparts, the entire audience of thousands fell completely silent. Danny felt tears forming in his eyes as he thought about the young men and women who'd given their lives in service to their country, and about the families who had lost sons and daughters, fathers and mothers. "We do this every year," the officer next to him said quietly, It's important that we remember the price of the freedoms we celebrate. Danny nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He thought about his own life, his own choices, and how he had spent years running away from responsibility and commitment, while people like James and the soldiers being honored had chosen to dedicate their lives to serving others. The international segment of the program brought military bands and cultural performers from countries around the world. Danny watched German military musicians, Swiss folk dancers, and American marching bands all contributing their unique talents to create something that transcended national boundaries. It's like the whole world is up there working together, Danny observed. That's exactly what it is, the officer replied. Military cooperation, cultural exchange, and international friendship, all expressed through music and performance. Yes. It's diplomacy at its best. As the evening neared its climax, the massed bands returned for the finale. Nearly 1,000 performers filled the performance area, creating a wall of sound that seemed to make the ancient castle stones vibrate. Danny could see James among the ceremonial guards, standing at perfect attention while the musical celebrations swirled around him. The final performance was Auld Lang Syne, being sung by the entire audience while the performers gradually left the field. Danny found himself singing along with thousands of other people, many of whom were visitors from around the world who had come to Edinburgh, specifically for this experience. As the last notes faded and the applause gradually died down, Danny felt emotionally exhausted and profoundly moved. He had entered the evening as a reluctant participant, trying to help fix a problem he had accidentally created. He was leaving as someone who had experienced something that had fundamentally changed his perspective on service, tradition, and the power of people working together toward common goals. James appeared in the viewing area as Danny was preparing to leave, looking pleased with how the evening had gone and curious about Danny's reaction to the experience. "So," James said with a smile, "what did you think of military pageantry and tradition?" Danny looked at him for a long moment, trying to find words for what he had experienced. "James, I need to tell you something. I came here tonight thinking I was helping you solve a practical problem with your uniform. I had no idea you were giving me ... this." He gestured toward the castle, the departing crowds, the lingering echoes of the music that had filled the evening air. "I've spent most of my adult life avoiding anything that seemed too structured, too formal, too connected to authority or tradition," Danny continued. "Tonight I learned that I was avoiding something beautiful, something meaningful, something that brings out the best in people." James nodded with understanding. "Military service isn't for everyone, Danny, but the values it represents, excellence, service, dedication to something larger than yourself, those are universal values that can be expressed in many different ways." As they walked together toward the exit, Danny found himself wondering how this evening would change his perspective on his own life and choices. He had spent years drifting from place to place, avoiding commitment and responsibility, telling himself that freedom meant having no obligations to anyone or anything. Tonight, he had seen hundreds of people who had chosen the opposite path, who had found freedom through service, meaning through discipline, and joy through working together toward shared goals. "James," Danny said as they reached the area where his motorcycle was parked, "I want you to know that this evening has meant more to me than you probably realize. You didn't just solve a problem tonight, you gave me something to think about." As they walked through the quieting streets of Edinburgh, Danny found himself reluctant for the evening to end. The experience had stirred something in him that he wasn't quite ready to examine, but that he knew was important. "Can I ask you something?" "Personal," Danny said as they approached his Harley Davidson. "After everything we've shared tonight, I think personal questions are fair game," James replied with a smile. "What made you choose military service? You seem like someone who could have done anything with your life." James was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I grew up in a small town where not many people had opportunities to see the world or be part of something bigger than themselves. The military offered me both the chance to serve my country and the chance to challenge myself in ways I never could have imagined." He paused, looking up at Edinburgh Castle still illuminated against the night sky. "But more than that, It gave me the chance to be part of a tradition that connects me to generations of people who chose service over self-interest. That connection, that sense of purpose, it's something I never found anywhere else. Danny nodded, understanding something about that feeling for the first time. Tonight, watching all those performers working together so perfectly, I kept thinking about how I've spent my whole adult life avoiding exactly that kind of commitment and structure. There's nothing wrong with independence, Danny. The world needs people who think differently, who challenge conventions, who choose unconventional paths. Maybe, Danny said, but tonight I realized that maybe some conventions exist because they work. Maybe some structures create opportunities rather than limitations. They had reached Danny's motorcycle, and both men seemed reluctant to end their conversation. The evening had created an unexpected friendship between two people who, under normal circumstances, might never have had a meaningful conversation. James, Danny said, making a decision that surprised even him, I want to ask you something that's going to sound crazy. After tonight, I'm prepared for anything. James replied with curiosity. Danny took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would sound impulsive and probably foolish to someone who had dedicated his life to careful planning and military precision. Is there any way someone like me could learn more about military service? Not necessarily join up, but maybe volunteer for something? Contribute somehow to what I saw tonight? James studied Danny's face carefully, looking for any sign that this was just an emotional reaction to an overwhelming evening. What he saw instead was genuine curiosity and something that looked like a man reassessing his entire approach to life. Danny, that's not a crazy question at all, James said slowly. There are actually several ways civilians can contribute to military community programs. Support groups for military families, youth development programs, even volunteer work with veterans who are transitioning back to civilian life. Really? Danny asked. His interest clearly piqued. What kind of volunteer work? Well, for example, we have a program that connects veterans with civilian mentors who help them develop job skills for careers outside the military. Your background in mechanical work and your independence could be incredibly valuable to someone trying to figure out how to start their own business or work in civilian trades. Danny felt something click into place in his mind. You mean I could actually help people? Use the skills I have to make a real difference. More than that, James continued, warming to the subject. There's also the possibility of civilian support. Roles within the military itself. Technical specialists, equipment, maintenance, logistics support, all areas where civilian expertise is not just welcome, but essential. As they talked, Danny began to understand that military service wasn't just about soldiers in uniform marching in formation. It was a vast network of people working together, many of them civilians, who had chosen to contribute their skills and talents to something larger than themselves. I have to admit something, Danny said, looking directly at James. When I woke up this morning, if someone had told me I'd be ending the day asking about ways to serve my country, I would have laughed at them. I've spent years thinking that patriotism and military service were for other people, not for someone like me. What changed your mind? James asked, genuinely curious. Danny thought for a moment, trying to articulate the shift that had occurred. In his thinking over the course of the evening, watching you, Danny said simply, watching how you handled the situation with your torn uniform, how you treated me with respect even though I probably looked like trouble, how you found a way to solve a problem that could have gotten you in serious difficulty. And then seeing all those performers working together so perfectly, he trailed off, struggling to find the right words. You showed me that service and structure don't have to mean giving up who you are. They can mean becoming the best version of who you are. James was quiet for a moment, clearly moved by Danny's words. Danny, I think you might be surprised by how much the military values the kind of independent thinking and problem-solving ability you've demonstrated tonight. We need people who can think outside the box, who aren't afraid to challenge assumptions, who can connect with people from all walks of life. So what would be the first step? Danny asked, and James could hear the determination in his voice. The first step would be talking to a recruiter about your background, your interests, and what kind of contribution you'd want to make. But Danny, I want you to promise me something. What's that? Promise me you'll think about this for at least a week before making any decisions. What you're feeling tonight is real, but it's also the result of a very intense and emotional experience. Make sure this is what you really want, not just what you're feeling in the moment. Danny nodded, appreciating James's wisdom and caution. That's fair. But James, I want you to know that even if I decide not to pursue military service tonight, has changed how I think about responsibility, community, and what it means to contribute to something important. James extended his hand for what both men knew would be their final handshake of the evening. Danny Morrison, it has been an honor and a privilege spending this evening with you. You've reminded me why I love what I do and why the values we represent matter. Danny shook his hand firmly. James Mitchell, you've given me the most important gift anyone has ever given me. You've shown me a path toward meaning and purpose that I never knew existed. As Danny started his motorcycle and prepared to ride away into the Edinburgh night, he looked back one last time at James standing in his perfect military bearing, representing everything that Danny was just beginning to understand about service, honor, and dedication. Hey James, Danny called out over the sound of his engine. Yeah. Next year when the tattoo comes around again, maybe I'll be volunteering instead of accidentally tearing uniforms. James grinned and gave him a formal military salute. I'll be looking forward to it, Danny. Ride safe. As Danny rode through the quiet streets of Edinburgh, found himself thinking not about the road ahead, but about the possibilities that had opened up behind him. The biker who had started the evening running away from commitment and responsibility was ending it by considering the most significant commitment he had ever contemplated. And it all started with one torn uniform and the grace of a royal guard who had chosen to see potential where others might have seen only trouble. 6 months later, when Danny submitted his application to join the Royal Marines, he listed Corporal James Mitchell as his personal reference. In the section asking why he wanted to serve, Danny wrote simply, "Because I learned that true freedom comes from choosing to serve something greater than yourself." The torn uniform had been repaired within days. The friendship that grew from that accidental collision would last a lifetime.